So today our topic is how NARM ties in with the fear and shame spiral. So as we already heard, and what is like a primal instinct in females, because females are still vulnerable, but they were much more vulnerable thousands and 10,000 and 100,000 years ago when humans lived in tribes. And so they depended on men who were protecting and providing in the whole tribe to keep them safe. And when that safety wasn't given, then there was this sense of threat that they would be raped or harmed or killed. And so females often still feel that primal fear of abandonment, of disconnection, and in relationship of being harmed, and that a man no longer loves them and cares for them. And then it's often fairly obvious, but what's sometimes not so obvious to women, and men even are in denial about that, is that men mainly want to have, of course, sex and want to be supported and appreciated by their partner. And so men have this underlying shame of not being good enough to make our partner feel safe and happy. And they experience shame when they're not appreciated as protectors and providers. And some men, if the woman doesn't look up to him. So that, of course, is now gets more and more difficult where we get into our modern and postmodern relationships. And so in NARM, as we already covered, right, there are these 5 core capacities that we looked at in the last 5 weeks around connection and attunement and trust and autonomy and love, sexuality. And these capacities we develop during our childhood when we are in a safe and caring and supportive environment. And if this environment isn't provided for us age appropriately, developing these core capacities, then we develop what NARM calls these adaptive survival styles that are caused by this complex post-traumatic stress. And then what we learn in NARM is that leads to shame-based identifications, right? So here we have the shame-based identification, and then the pride-based counter-identifications. So what we explored in these previous five sessions was there is the basic capacity, for example, for connection. And then when we're not able to develop that capacity, we feel disconnected from physical and emotional self, difficulty relating to others. And then in the more unconscious way is the shame-based identification of shame at existing, shame at feeling like a burden, shame of feeling of not belonging. And that gets overlaid by the pride-based counter-identification of pride in being alone, or pride in not needing others, pride in not being emotional. And that's true for all the 5 core capacities. So if you're watching this video or want to revisit all the 5 basic capacities and survival styles, you can just watch the catch-up videos for each of these. And so Brené Brown is probably the most famous person, has many TED Talks and is a real expert around shame. And she defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So this shame kind of makes us shrink. But she differentiates about shame in women and in men, and says shame in women, shame creates, and actually I added that fear part here, right? So where I disagree a little bit with NARM, and what I want to suggest we look at a little bit different, is that of course women also feel shame around their looks of not being thin, young, and beautiful enough, and others seeing them struggle or not being able to do it all and to do it perfectly. But I think there is a deeper fear underlying that will somehow not give them the safety and the protection and the care and the support that they need for their well-being. And in men, shame is typically triggered when they are perceived as weak, whether it is at work, on the football field or other sport field, in bed, in marriage, or with children. And so when men experience shame, this is often also combined with fear, but it's this fear of having their shame exposed. And so they cover it up with these pride-based survival styles, and females may do that too. Right? So that I just want to bring in the fear dynamic in females. And so when we look again at this graphic that we used a few times before, the fear part fear usually creates either a fight or flight reaction, right? You either fight with your partner in a relationship to reconnect with him or to get him to do what you need him to do so you feel safe and connected and supported, or there is the flight movement where you might run away from the perceived danger or from your partner. While the shame part is here in the freeze section, right, where somewhere here we have the word shame shut down. So shame usually leads to kind of a shrinking, and that's when men no longer want to talk, and when men, start to watch TV and just retreat somewhere in their space, leave me alone, right, go in their man cave and things like that. And so it's very important to understand, and we will look at the end at this fear-shame downward spiral, that this fear is often activates the sympathetic nervous system, while the shame activates the what we call parasympathetic or dorsal vagal system. And obviously there is no social engagement possible when the female is in fear and the male is in shame, or some other combination of that. Right? So what we want to practice is to get back to social engagement by dealing with our fear and shame. And so here is, as a recap, and I will put this into the chat window when we do the next breakout. So what I want you to do in the breakout session is to explore maybe one or two examples for the females when you experienced fear in your relationship, and for the males when you experienced shame in your relationship, if that fear/shame was related to a fear around shame around being disconnected from your physical and emotional self and from others, right, in your relationship. Is this around connection with your partner and yourself? And obviously, when we go into fear-shame, then we're disconnecting from our authentic self, and we go into some kind of anxiety and child consciousness. Or is it related to fear and shame around expressing your needs and expressing your feelings? Right? And the shame then is that you're being perceived as needy, as unfulfilled, as empty, as undeserving as caregiver. Or is the fear and shame related to trust issues, right? You're afraid because you cannot trust your partner, or as a man, you feel shame because your partner no longer trusts you, right? I think for a lot of men to hear, I can no longer trust you, you lied to me, you're a loser, all these things can create deep shame in males, and in females, of course, the fear of not being able to trust your partner. And so that often leads to the fear-shame downward spiral. So are your episodes of fear and shame in the relationship related to trust, or are they related to autonomy? So autonomy was around speaking your truth and setting boundaries. And so that the fear-shame here is about being angry, resentful of authority, being rebellious, and disappointing others. And then the final one, Anthony mentioned the bedroom, right? Sexuality, difficulty integrating our heart with a vital sexuality, and our self-esteem being based on looks. That's probably more related to females, of course, to males too, and performance more related to the male side, the shame side. And so the shame of being hurt, rejected, being physically flawed, being unloved and unlovable. And then the pride side, But we want to mainly focus on the fear, shame, pride in rejecting first, in being perfect, not allowing mistakes, being seamless, having everything together. So this next image is from a book called How to Improve Your Relationship Without Talking About It. And that's a little misleading because it's just a different way of engaging with your partner. So if females experience fear, the male can lean in and rebuild the trust and the connection and autonomy, right? Do all these things to make her fear go away. And the females, when they realize that the man experiences shame, right, they can use certain language and ways that she interacts with him to bring him back into the social engagement. And this fear, shame, downward spiral, this is a whole 2-hour session in the normal training, but men usually, when they meet someone that they're romantically interested in, the chemicals in our brain support us to really listen and to pay attention and to be attentive and do all these wonderful things. And females in that romance phase also make themselves attractive and seductive, and this is all supported by hormones. And then when that goes away, that romance phase, then women often feel that the man has changed, and they do something that a man perceive as, right? It's not real complaining, but men can perceive it as complaining, that they're not good enough, that they have changed. And the man hear that as she has a problem, and they then try to fix the problem when all she needs is not being fixed, but being listened to and go back to the romance phase. And then when he doesn't get it, she may repeat the same thing over and over. And the man perceives that as nagging. He withdraws into his cave. And that, of course, creates the fear of abandonment, exactly the opposite what the female needs. And when he comes out of the cave, she may often shame him, right? You're never paying attention to me, and you're not the same guy that I met, and the other. And then he may become aggressive or passive aggressive. So I'm the passive aggressive guy, which is also a form of anger, right? And then she may become emasculating, and then we get into the realm of sexual infidelity and emotional infidelity, and then there is the relationship crash. And sometimes I would say 50% of the consultations that I do with couples or even with individuals, I first need to address the fear-shame dynamic, because often they're no longer really talking or arguing with each other because the woman is in fear and the male is in shame. And if we go back to that image, right, I need to first then work to deactivate the fear and the shame to bring them back into the social engagement. And then we can start to deal with the underlying issues, right? Why is there the fear and the shame in the first place? So next week, we're gonna build on what we covered today, and we're gonna look at these underlying false identities. So there we go back to the process that we do in my trainings for years now, which comes from the book Undefended Love. And that is exactly the same as what NARM does in the healing cycle with the false identity. So next week we will have an exercise where you will discover or get in touch with one of your false identities. We have usually a few false identities, so there's 21 in total. And so you will discover one, and then you get affirmation and some tips how you can go into the healing process. And then in the following week, we go to the 4 pillars of NARM. It's where you can then really work with your false identity. Agency is one of these 4 pillars. So I hope you can join us again.